Oh no, Brian, what am I doing? I'm tweeting out that we're going live instead of getting ready for the show. And I'm still doing it. Can I stall a little longer? All right, I did. So we are live, twitch.tv/nerd numbers. Brian Foster and Dre Alvarez back to talk the NBA. Let's see, completely miffed the intro because of that. But anyway, I'm Nerd Numbers, found most places on the internet as Nerd Numbers. With me as always is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. Preseason in the books, Brian, or at least at the start. How you feeling?
Yeah, no, I'm feeling a little discombobulated too with all these NBA games back. Watching the Warriors play in Japan, watching the Nets at full strength, and yeah, we're going to talk about all kinds of NBA stuff, and of course, chess as usual.
Of course, well, chess has gotten elevated to a first-class citizen. We'll talk that last. So basically, today's show is going to be preseason. We're bringing back one of my favorites, Brian. You at least unofficially named it, but small sample size theater. So in prep for today's show, I went through the box score of every single preseason game, not including tonight. We're recording the night of 10/4, good buddy, 2022. I like when you do that. I need to remember to like date the shows because sometimes, stuff happens. We'll talk a little bit about that after we record the show. So it's nice to at least date when we record it. Small sample size theater. So I went through all the box scores and kind of had a stream of consciousness. Overreacting to small sample size. That's what you have to do. We're going to talk Tyler Herro getting a hero contract, Lonzo Ball being the next Brandon Roy, StatMuse having a good point about players returning from, the prodigal sons returning. Interesting take from Kareem, which we'll talk with Kyrie. That'll be a fun one. Maybe some baseball, maybe some chess. That is a loaded show, Brian. So let's get going. All right. So feel free to add any of these. Like I said, I just went through the preseason games. First one, though, Brian, how excited were you about this? In the first game against the Washington Wizards of the preseason, so the first preseason game was the Golden State Warriors versus the Washington Wizards. The Warriors looked terrible. The starters looked horrendous. When I looked over the box score, the very start of this, I actually texted you and said, how the hell did the Warriors beat the Wizards? Because the Warriors couldn't hit the broadside of the barn. Very simple answer in game one, and that answer was?
Yeah, James Wiseman. He's back, he's healthy, and word on the street is the Warriors were very jet lagged. They just flew into Japan and had to play a game right away, so that makes sense. The starters did not play well, but for some reason Wiseman did. The biggest thing, though, is, last show I'm talking about the Warriors, I'm saying it's a big gamble. Is Wiseman going to be able to stay healthy? Well, he's healthy right now. And one thing that I've remembered in the week since then is that he actually has been healthy all offseason. He was hurt last season and then got healthy and maybe, could have tried to play during the playoff run, but they'd shut him down. So he had a nice long offseason where he was actually playing basketball. And he looks like he can be a rotation player for the Warriors. Looks very athletic, a lot better on defense. And that's kind of the wild card, for the Warriors being greedy and not having enough veterans, right? Is they're saying some of these rookies, are going to develop. They like Ryan Rollins, who they drafted. They've got this guy, Travion Williams, who's a center out of Purdue. So they have all these young players, and a lot of them are going to be on Santa Cruz, but some of them are going to ask to play in the rotation, including Wiseman and Kuminga.
Here's an interesting thing. I got to give a huge shout out to Spotrac. I don't know how recently they added this. As I've noted, I've been kind of MIA in the offseason. They added percent of league cap on player salary, which I love. I use it on an internal tool that one of these days I'm going to get published, Brian. I do a similar thing where I do percentage of salary. So the key point about James Wiseman is he is only 9% of the league salary cap, as in, if you were expecting him on a team, an average starter, you would wisely expect about 20%, right? If you wanted them to be average. Wiseman is 9%. He's $9 million for next season, $12 million the season after, and $15 million as a qualifying offer, though he'll probably get an extension of some sort. So the key point about Wiseman right now, and this is my general point about draft picks, is as long as you are not expecting the draft pick to play, the upside is the contract. The reason most teams fail with draft picks, this would be like, say, Cade Cunningham, is they play them and players are not traditionally very good. So if we look at James Wiseman in a Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid kind of role, as in Blake Griffin even, a player that was injured a year or two, got to hang out with the team, got ramped up to speed, and then becomes good. This could just be fantastic, because then the Warriors could have 2 years of a center, and as you've noted, this is an area that they are weak at if we're just talking depth wise. So my big point on the Wiseman draft pick, I was very annoyed with many people pointing out, say, LaMelo Ball is a better pick. My point is, if you're a contender, you should never, ever, ever be gambling on a good draft pick to be one of your starters.
That's right.
You get an established starter, you can get good draft picks and then see if they're good. And if they are not good, you should have an established backup or better. And there have been Ben Simmons, interestingly enough, for the 76ers was this exact point. They had TJ McConnell at the time. So if Ben Simmons is everything he needs to be, star number one established player, which he was in his fake rookie year, right? Because he missed his season with injury. Fantastic. You give him the reins and he goes. Conversely, if he doesn't look good, if he doesn't look up to snuff, you give TJ McConnell the ball and slowly ramp up Ben Simmons. So James Wiseman is now in that position. I was never mad I thought James Wiseman was a good pick, and I didn't even hate the Warriors tanking. What I was against was going, no team should expect their top 5 draft pick to make an impact in their first season. That was the big mistake. And anybody saying another top 5 draft pick was a better choice is just kind of lying to themselves. So Wiseman could be good. We kind of mentioned the Warrior. I disagree fundamentally with some people that think they've gotten better losing Gary Payton, with Draymond Green and Steph Curry getting a year older, with Klay Thompson healthy and now back to a full-time starting role. I think they could potentially be in trouble. But that being said, James Wiseman is a bright spot. Dante DiVincenzo, another one of those. He didn't look good in the preseason game, though. You're kind of making this argument, and it's very easy to see, is like the preseason doesn't mean anything. So
yeah,
all of these this is the easy, like, post the suffix to all of these takes, is like all of these takes are nonsense. Even when the regular season gets going, I remember in the midst of the Warriors dynasty with Kevin Durant, there was the start of the season where Andre Iguodala was the best player in the NBA for about 3 weeks. And that part of that is because not only did he start hot, it takes other players a little while to catch up in terms of total games. So I think the Warriors had like the most games quickly. Andre Iguodala went off. And so at Boxscore Geeks, Andre Iguodala was the top player for a week or two in a row. And it's easy to go like, oh, what are these people talking about? What do they know? It's like, no, it takes a while for things to catch up. When you throw in the fact that these games don't matter, a lot of these teams are not giving their starters real minutes, or not playing all of their starters. Giannis has not been playing for the Bucks. It makes a heck of a lot of sense. That being said, I'm going to keep going with small sample size theater, Brian, because it's fun to be a conventional sports fan.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out that Andre is back for this season, even though he's going to be 38 years old, or maybe already is. And the way the reporting on this went down was that he told the team that he was going to retire and he was done. And Steph Curry single-handedly talked him out of it. And now he's back. So, yeah, the theory that Steph Curry is the whole franchise, not just the leader, it seems to be proven true again this offseason, bringing back Andre.
Interesting point on that is one, he has started saying things like, he's a tech guy first and a basketball player second. Yeah. Basketball's his hobby, which is kind of true, right? He's been tapering off in minutes. It is funny to think about that, right? Where even myself, you and me, kind of fascinating. Similar age bracket, and I thought this to myself, and I've had this conversation with my wife. If I had graduated traditionally, which would have been age 22, which I didn't, I went back to grad school. And if you looked at me traditional retire at 65, which no longer seems to be the case, right? Millennials, we're not retiring at 65. I wouldn't even be halfway through my career, even being in my 40s, or maybe close to halfway, depending, right? If we went by traditional metrics and if we go by modern, So it's really funny when you look at a player like Andre Iguodala, who's 38, and you go, yeah, really, he's going to be done with basketball in a year or two. And if he wants to have a career, he has to be doing other stuff. So it's kind of a silly line to say, but also the right maneuver. Players that learn to pivot when they leave the league, you kind of have to do it. Otherwise, we look at documentaries like Broke that point out that a lot of athletes that do not really adjust for the fact that they are going to be done making the lion's share of their money when they're 40, and what to do with that, either, invest it wisely and live a different lifestyle, will be in a different shape. Also, we kind of talk wrestling a lot, and Andre Iguodala, much like wrestlers, it's like when you're out the door, you're done, right? Like when he retires, he's done. So a point Dave Barry had back in the day when Shaquille O'Neal signed with the Celtics was, if you wanted to get courtside seats to the Celtics, it would be over $1 million a season likely. Whereas Shaquille O'Neal was getting paid over $1 million a season to have courtside seats. So it's like, as long as it doesn't endanger his health, because that was one comment Dirk Nowitzki made post-retirement, is he said it's really hard for him to walk near his kids, and had he hung it up even a few years earlier, he probably would have been in better shape. So as long as Iguodala takes care of himself, doesn't overexert himself, and even then it's his choice, right? If you want to be Tom Brady and get divorced so you can still play football, that's your prerogative. And with all of these athletes near 40, past 40, it is, when it's done, it's done. So, I agree with him, and he might even just be, might be an Adonis Haslam, but a little better, right? A locker room guy that kind of helps as a coach.
Yeah, and last year, like you said, he was really good in the minutes he played, but he had a neck injury later on the season, was not able to play as much as he wants. So, yeah, it's no joke. Like, a neck injury that's a bad thing. Like, you don't want to deal with that. So, yeah, I mean, we'll see. If he can put some minutes in during the playoffs and the finals, that would help the Warriors, in my opinion, despite his age. Old guys
also,
unite.
I mean, he's getting. One of the things we'll kind of talk, especially when we get to Tyler Herro, is kind of what you need to justify a contract. Iguodala is at $2.9 million next season. According
right.
to Spotrac, that is 1.48% of the league salary cap. So essentially, if you look at it, Iguodala needs to produce 1 to 2 wins to be worth it. And if you think he's a locker room guy that helps, if you think a coach can swing the balance 1 or 2 wins, which we think some of the better ones might be able to, that's worth it. So I would say this isn't hard. This isn't hard math. And here's another funny point I'm going to give you. Last one. Sometimes when teams give roster spots to bad players, I'm looking at my Nuggets. They're terrifying with a lot of players they have. It's a risk that those bad players will get played. Iguodala, at his age, he's eating a roster spot. He is not going to be a showboater that tries to, do a lot of things that hurt the team. He is taking a roster spot, and you can kind of just gauge and say the odds that Iguodala will do less damage with that roster spot than, say, a lottery pick or a first 2-round draft pick is very likely.
Yeah,
that's my sense.
Yeah, no, that's right. And we just said they have so many young players that, getting the old guys in there is good. I wish they had a few more old guys, but it seems like there's enough available that they can make a move if they have injuries. And you mentioned Dante DiVincenzo. His numbers weren't great, but he looked healthy on the court. JaMychal Green looked great as well. Like, those two guys are such good players. And
those are good pickups. Yeah, if I'm going to be annoyed. I mean, the Warriors are the kings of stumbling on wins. So if Wiseman, DiVincenzo, and JaMychal Green all play well, they're going to weather losing. I mean, it is ridiculous for a team to be able to lose David Lee when he was playing well, to lose Kevin Durant, to lose now Gary Payton, to lose
JaVale McGee is a big one.
Well, I'm talking like starter. I mean, JaVale McGee was good, but I mean, at his point, he was off the bench. But just a team losing a key caliber starter that was a key part of a title run, having that happen 3 times and being able to bounce back is just silly. So the fact that the Warriors have and can do it is just ridiculous. And, they do it again. That's fine. They're in terms of teams I would prefer to root for, they're not bad in the NBA. All right, let's keep going. I've been liking the optimistic Warriors start of the show the last 2. All right. Celtics kind of sad on a few fronts. I took the under on the Celtics preseason because I thought they were banged up. And then, of course, we got the Rob Williams news. So my under pick looks really good. But preseason, here's a funny one. Al Horford looked really good in the preseason game. Again, who knows? Can he keep it up the whole
He
season?
was good last year.
Yeah, Al Horford. No, Al Horford was a key reason the Celtics got to the finals last year, which was ridiculous. I thought he had like one last season in him with the 76ers. And he started atrophying, and then he went back to the Celtics, and then he turned it around last season for the Celtics. So if he can do it again, I love the Malcolm Brogdon pickup. I have been incensed with the Bucks for letting Malcolm Brogdon go in the middle of the title run.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the Bucks could have made 2 or 3 finals and maybe had 1 or 2 more titles had they just kept him around. They got unlucky in the bubble, and really they should have just kept Brogdon. And it's one reason I'm upset with my state having a team. Because if you can't afford to keep a player of Brogdon's caliber on a team that just almost won a title, you don't deserve a team. That's my 2 cents. That's almost, in European football there is relegation. I almost wish there was relegation in North American sports for teams that do moves like that. In a fantasy league, you could get in trouble for collusion for that kind of crap. So I've always been a Brogdon fan, and I really hope he helps out the Celtics, but a lot of that's going to depend on if Rob Williams, the Time Lord, gets back. But, Al Horford and Brogdon look good for the Celtics. Continuing, any comments on Celtics?
No, keep going. We talked about Rob Williams. He's great. I hope he gets healthy.
All right, so Markkanen with the Jazz looked really good. Any bad player can have a good game, so maybe it's worth it. I don't buy it, but I mean, that was just the one thing that stood out when I was really interested popping open the Jazz, and when I popped open the Jazz, I was like, Markkanen had a good game. All right, maybe the Jazz just make centers look good.
No, I'm down on the Jazz. I think they're tanking, and I think they're gonna, try to trade Colin Sexton somewhere after he takes a bunch of shots.
Here's hoping. I mean, it is always annoying when you really, really hope that teams kind of have a bigger plan in mind. And I think one of the issues happens is there is so much turnover in NBA front office. That's really cool, the effect when I'm going to websites. It's like giving me different colors. But there is so much turnover in NBA front offices just so frequently that plans just don't stick around, and there just really isn't anything solid. So that's the problem. Is I always get really, really trepidatious when I'm like, hopefully this team has long-term thinking, and then going, I doubt it, right? Like that just is not traditionally the case, but we'll see. Terry Eason on the Spurs, that and Jakob Poeltl were the only 2 players. Well, Jakob Poeltl was the only player I recognized on the Spurs. That's a bad thing. Tari Eason was a draft pick for him, and he looks good. So, I mean, maybe that was all I had to think about when I opened up the Spurs game.
Well, it's a bad sign when Greg Popovich says, like, this is a Division III college level team. Like, Greg Popovich himself is not complimentary of his own team. So, yeah, we'll see. It could be one of the worst teams in the league.
Oof. Yeah, I mean, it's a bummer, and it's, as to reiterate a story I've told with Ben Guest, I've told with Dave Barry, told multiple times. I should make it an article, actually. But essentially, the Spurs were a Moneyball team, and in part of the reason they were a Moneyball team was because they were a former ABA team, and when the ABA, which was a competing league to the NBA, when it went under, the teams that came into the NBA that merged all agreed to give over some of their television revenue. And that basically meant that the Nuggets, the Pacers, the Nets, and the Spurs, all of those, except for the Nets, already small market teams, were playing at a loss compared to other teams in terms of how much revenue they had, because they were giving away part of their revenue. When the ABA and NBA finally actually agreed, so it was the Spirit of St. Louis were the team, the ABA team that was getting some of the television revenue, they finally agreed to settle. So that meant all of the ABA teams were now fully operational, so to speak. Once the Spurs got fully operational, they just started spending like everybody else and doing horribly. And it was kind of funny because it went, when you had a hindrance on you, you were really good, right? When we told you couldn't, use your left hand, you were amazing. And as soon as we gave you your left hand back, you started fighting like everybody else and looked terrible. And so that's kind of where the Spurs are, which is kind of a bummer. And then another aspect is, right, Greg Popovich has been known as a good coach, but a lot of his coaches have been leaving. I mean, case in point, Becky Hammon was under him, right?
Yeah, she was on the Spurs.
Just went to the WNBA and won a title. So it's like, in the United States, I've mentioned this a lot, we are very prone to give credit to the figurehead behind a good organization, the Steve Jobs, et cetera. Whereas usually that's a good organization in place. And so I think the Spurs have just been slowly atrophying parts of their good organization over the years. And it's kind of a bummer to see them turn into, a normal small market team now.
Yeah, I haven't fully digested what happened, but you're right. At some point, they just lost their edge and haven't been able to draft all the good players that they did, say, 10 years ago. Like Kawhi Leonard was the last big coup draft pick that they did, I think. And they've had a lot of consistency. It hasn't just been Popovich, right? R.C. Buford has been the executive there, and Peter, what's his name, is the owner. Like it's been a pretty solid team, but they've just it almost feels like they haven't adapted to the new NBA. Greg Popovich famously does not like 3-point shooting. It's what are we talking about here? And while maybe you can go too far with that, we're going to talk about Tyler Herro pretty soon. At the same time, yeah, like they are falling behind, it looks like.
Which is a bummer, but they had a good 2-decade run of being the best franchise in the NBA.
Yep.
All right, this is a fun one, Brian. This was a fun night to watch on Twitter, which is the Suns lost to the Adelaide 36ers. Yeah. Now I'm curious, do you know the origin behind the name? I thought
I don't.
When I first saw that name, I assumed it was like a D-League affiliate with the 76ers or something.
No.
So yeah, we'll have to look it up. Hopefully nothing racist based, because for instance, the 49ers out here in football is a
I'm guessing it's an analog. That's the year they got their independence, just like 70, maybe 1936. I don't know. We should look it up.
All right, yeah. The Adelaide City Eagles changed their name after the 1902 to reflect the history of South Australia's proclamation in 1836. So there
1836. Right. Sorry, I sold you short, Australia, by 100 years.
Yeah, but all right, so we'll give it to them. But I mean, what I really liked about this game was, first off, it shows how preseason games work. As in, the Suns starters, including Devin Booker, looked fine. Chris Paul, Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges, DeAndre Ayton. There's one other guy off the bench that looked good as well. They looked fine, but they all played 14 to 20 minutes. The Adelaide starters played the whole game. Additionally, the 36ers just took a bunch of threes. And I've got Basketball and Paper on the bookshelf behind me, and he mentions this as a high variance but, potential strategy for an underdog. So this is nothing new. I mean, what was funny about this is it was fun to see the overreaction on Twitter, like, should the Suns be relegated? The Suns are going to be terrible. Some people with cooler heads were like, for what it's worth, the Suns are going to win 50-plus games this season. Chill. But it is always fun when you just see a very simple proof of concept of, if you take some decent basketball players, give them a ton of 3-point shots against a better team, they can overcome the variance. Now, could they do it over a 3-game series, a 5-game series, a 7-game series, an 82 regular season? Absolutely not. Single game, though, can happen, and it was fun to see.
Yeah, that's right. And I did watch the second half of that game, and yeah, the Suns starters were not playing at all, but still, the Suns bench players should dominate an Australian League team. And it's worth pointing out that this team went 10-18 last year. They weren't exactly like the cream of the crop of the Australian League, although they have improved this year apparently. But still, it's preseason. I don't really care. Maybe some of their star players, I forget the dude's name, but the main guy who's American, something the second, he might get a look from an NBA team based off this game. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it'd be nice. And I mean, for what it's worth, I've had that before. For the past couple of years, I would look at call-ups to the NBA, and it was always juniors or seniors that scored a lot of points in the NCAA. And I refuse to believe that was the most effective use of it. Early, when we started the Boxscore Geeks, I can't remember the player's name. We did actually make like a brief slide deck on this player for his agent. Didn't go anywhere, but would have been kind of cool. But there was a player Patrick identified overseas that was a really good NCAA player and just did not get a look in the NBA, but looked really great overseas. I really don't think that the current NBA teams do a really great job at who they fill their roster slots on. I think that I think the average NBA team leaves 3 to 5 wins on the table just on bad replacement call-ups. If we think of Major League Baseball and having a minor league team and calling someone up, fun fact about that, Brian, the Pittsburgh Pirates have a player named Andres Alvarez in their minor league system, and he's really good.
How did I not know this? Oh, I'm sorry.
So years ago when I started the Boxscore Geeks, I set up a basic Google alert on like Andres Alvarez sports, and so back when we occasionally would get picked up by True Hoop, I would get an alert that, True Hoop had said Andres Alvarez wrote about Carmelo Anthony. Hasn't happened in years. I suddenly started getting these pings again, and it was there were 2 cases. There was an Andres Alvarez who was a college football player. I think they've graduated. And then Andres Alvarez, the college baseball player and now minor league baseball player playing really well. I missed the opportunity. I was out of town. But we have a minor league team in Appleton. I would have loved to have gone and watched him play. But anyway, baseball has a decent minor league system method for getting call-up players. NBA is terrible at it. I can guarantee that just looking over the data. Whenever I have to add new players into a database and see where they came from, pick better players. So, maybe the 36ers, it's like I would be willing to bet a 36er player is probably better than the average college junior senior that an NBA team is that was maybe 48 to 60 on the draft board and fell just outside of the draft. That player will get a 10-day contract, probably never do great in the NBA. The NBA could 100% do better. Don't forget players like Jeremy Lin. And what kind of happened with Jeremy Lin after the fact was teams were just more embarrassed that they'd messed up on him. So instead of going, we're doing it wrong, let's fix it, they kind of ignored it. And I mean, even Daryl Morey shows up in a book, The Undoing Project, talking about these, and the Jeremy Lin thing doesn't come up. So it's remarkable. Like, front offices don't want to admit when they're wrong, and The Undoing Project is terrible for that reason because Daryl Morey looks ridiculous in it. Anyway, more comments.
Yeah, keep going.
All right, this is what I'm excited about, Brian. Tell me if my optimism. So my optimism, if you're looking, the start of the list was pretty bad. It's going to get worse. Sorry. Ben Simmons, Brian.
Yep.
Ben Simmons looks back. Ben Simmons put up like a triple-double per 48 in the 15-20 minutes he played, like a 5-4-5. Classic Ben Simmons, missed 2 free throws, but Ben Simmons looks back. KD looked fine. Kyrie Irving looked fine. I mean, like Kyrie Irving got like 11 points on 9 shots. It's classic Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving is very modern day Kobe, as in a slightly above average shooter with really high variance. When he goes off, he can have those 50-point games, 60-point games. So if the Nets are healthy, Brian, this could be something. This could be fun.
Yeah, we've talked about the Nets recently, and this, first preseason game does not, tamp down my expectations at all. But at the same time, Ben Simmons has just not put together a healthy season in a while. So I'm going to wait and see, but it's great to see him back on the court. And, of course, we're going to talk more about Kyrie Irving later in the show. He was called out by Kareem.
Well, what's frustrating, so I'll kind of jump ahead to one of our topics, which was StatMuse. So StatMuse noted that Jamal Murray, Kawhi Leonard, Ben Simmons, and Damian Lillard, all of these players are back after missing significant time.
I don't like that account at all, by the way, Dre. That's the bad, shitty trolling account. But it's like, worst person made a really good point. I thought StatMuse made a good point.
It's very indicative of, in my opinion, the analytics movement as a whole, because Justin Kupatko, who founded Basketball Reference, helped start up StatMuse. And the goal was, I know he was really interested in kind of natural language search engines, being able to ask a question in human language and get a statistical answer. That was the goal of that site. And by the way, it's failed miserably in terms of that at the high end. StatMuse, if you go there and try and ask very human questions, will fail and give you weird, Giannis is the top per player of 2021. And you're like, that wasn't what I asked. But Justin Kupatko isn't with them anymore. And then annoyingly, so, this is a analytics site which started with a semi-analytics person. I'm very dour on most people in the analytics movement. I've made this known, even the more popular ones such as Dean Oliver and Justin Kupatko. I've got not like beef, I'm not fighting with them. I think I follow both Justin and Dean. They don't follow me, so heck, I can have some beef. But, I don't think that highly of them. And as a whole, I've kind of noted that this space The average analyst in the basketball analytics space is so far below an average analyst in any other field. And they kind of, ironically, they kind of have to be. Because if you are a semi-decent analyst and you look at your net worth and you go, how much could I get paid in finance? How much could I get paid in healthcare? How much could I get paid? Let's see, what are some other good ones? Finance, healthcare, another couple of good fields. I'm dropping, like oil and gas was where I started.
You work
How
for the
much could I
government, get some good pensions and benefits.
Government actually has, some pretty good pension, pretty good things. Excel, you can do that. How much could I get paid in any of those fields? And then go, how much could I get paid as a stats analyst? It is a huge step below. So you have to really like numbers and really be bad at your own self-worth, which it's, a contradiction in terms. So in general, the average analyst, I'm not a huge fan of, because I'm just like, they're not as good. I'm sorry. I've said this, I do this as a hobby. I've never thought of doing this professionally, because it just, at least for an NBA team or a mainstream athlete, it's just not worth it. But even, if you start with a semi-decent analyst, which I'll put Justin Kupako, Dean Oliver, are in the upper echelon, I at least give them some respect. There are analysts in this field that I have some respect for. There are many more that I have zero respect for, at least numbers-wise. We probably get along at a dinner party when we're talking politics or other outside things, but not talking about NBA analytics. So you start with a semi-decent analyst with a semi-decent idea, and then slowly it just gets corrupted for page views and kind of goes downhill. And that's been the field as a whole our entire time in it. So that's what happened with StatMuse. StatMuse started with a semi-decent person, was a pretty fun-looking site with a cool idea, and now to the point is it's a trolling account that brings up I called them Brian Burke stats back in the day. So Brian Burke, analyst we really like, made I forget the advanced NFL stats, something like that. It was bought out by ESPN, which we're a fan of. I'm always okay with analysts we like getting paid, even if I think their work is going to get shelved, which is what happened. Same thing happened with Draft Express. I like seeing people I like get paid. So Brian Burke, though, hated these stats that were things like Joe Montana is the best quarterback in January against, AFC teams in the fourth quarter. Because you go, what does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. So StatMuse has both leaned into Brian Burke's stats as trolling stats, going like Kawhi Leonard was, 1 for 7 last night, and, was 1 for 40 in his last attempts against this team. And it's like, that doesn't mean anything. Who cares? So all of that precursor to StatMuse giving a decent
they
point
made
about
a good
all
post.
They made a good post about all of these major players missing games. However, that being said, the I would say Ben Simmons age-wise is the one we can be most optimistic, because all of those other players a little older. Kawhi is ancient and coming off his third or fourth major injury now. Dame is older as well. Jamal Murray is just, I think it was injured, came back, got injured again. So of the players to be optimistic coming back from injury, Ben Simmons is the highest. And I really do hope, because we really do like Ben Simmons a lot.
Yeah, some people are high on the Portland Trailblazers, and Dre, you know this. Traditionally, I just bury the Trailblazers. I love Dame Lillard, but I've never liked the team around him. But some people are higher on them. We talked about the Warriors losing Gary Payton. That's where he went. He went to the Trailblazers. So, maybe if Dame is healthy and Gary Payton gets enough minutes, they could go somewhere. But it's going to be tough.
I made some preseason bets, and this is one where I would probably have to cash it out early, which is kind of nice. One thing I'll give about the modern gambling landscape, if you look at the sports books at, say, DraftKings and FanDuel, is they are really the stock market. So you can buy a bet and then you can sell it at a given point, which if you want to make, I have not been able to make money because it's not legal where I live, but how you would have to do it. I bought a Damian Lillard MVP vote. Like long shot. I think I spent $50 for the upside of like $6,000 for that reason. So, I think if the Portland Trailblazers went on a hot stretch in the middle of the season, I could probably cash that out for a couple hundred, which would be my hope. Because I'm not high on the Trailblazers as a title team, but I am high on them outperforming expectations because of Gary Payton at potentially getting into that 40 window range, which is right kind of what you need. And Damian Lillard, of course, would get the MVP vote. So I could like that if he comes back. But man, the number of days away, that is freaky. All right, Brian, another one. This ticked me off in a bad, good way. Montrezl Harrell is a player we've always loved. Keeps bouncing around. Who picked him up but Daryl Morey, my
Just a
favorite.
few
And
weeks ago, like almost the whole offseason was gone.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Good pickup. I mean,
Yep.
I'm a fan of it, and he looks good for the 76ers. So the 76ers could be all right too. The 76ers are high volatility in James Harden and Joel Embiid. But if Montrezl Harrell is good for them and James Harden and Joel Embiid can, be healthy 75% of the season, I think it's really hard to say who the favorite coming out of the East is. I think the Nets,
Mm.
the Bucks, the 76ers. We'll get to it in a second. I was really high on the Bulls, but the Lonzo news is bad.
Yeah, before we go to that, I'll just say briefly, I have a hard time betting against Giannis. We talked about how the Bucks have screwed things up, but man, Giannis is so good. I would not bet against the Bucks this season.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's the classic LeBron thing, which is going if you've got just a really strong player. The Bucks won 51 games last season. Giannis is still there. I could buy that, but it's hard to know. And I mean, the top of the East was not super strong last year.
I think the league's wide open in general. We were talking about the Suns. The Warriors won, but they're sketchy as well. Like, there's a lot of teams at the top that are kind of equal, in my opinion, starting the season.
I think we just really haven't had the natural kind of crystallization of super teams around young talents hasn't quite happened yet. And a lot of the old one, Kevin Durant, LeBron James are still, and CP3 are still kind of holding firm. So I think in another couple of years, we'll start seeing that just happen naturally. But to your point, it is kind of just, a little bit of atrophy in the leagues. And the fact that some of the top teams like the Suns, the Rockets, and the Warriors all had some kind of interesting stuff happening, which kept them kind of staying firm. So we'll just have to see what happens. All right, let's get through the rest of my bad hot takes. Ja Morant and Dylan Brooks were both back healthy for the Memphis Grizzlies, and both looked back to their old selves. So it's you've called this star neutralizers about, say, Eric Gordon for James Harden back in the day for the Houston Rockets. Dylan Brooks is a star neutralizer for Ja Morant because we love Ja Morant around here. Game of Thrones is back. Ja Morant is back. Got to have that. Dylan Brooks is terrible. So. The Memphis Grizzlies are going to stay in place as long as who's the other ones? It's Dylan Brooks, and the other one I know Ben Guest brought him up before.
Oh, the player that you don't like on that team, Jaren Jackson.
There are two teams. It's Dylan Brooks is one, and I'm going to have to try and remember the other. Give me a second.
And just to explain the Game of Thrones reference, when Ja Morant got drafted, I'm like, oh, Jorah Mormont, that's basically his name, right? And
Jaren Jackson, by the way.
Yeah.
But Ja Morant, I mean, he really is. He's a hero. He should be on the Knights Guard. He's amazing. Dylan Brooks is, I don't know, Joffrey or something.
Okay, so I am a big Dylan Brooks hater, Dre, but the only thing I'll say is the biggest Dylan Brooks fan is Anna Jane Smith, and to me, she's one of the most legitimate NBA analysts out there. So I'm a little conflicted because he does play good defense, but I still cannot go along with Anna Jane here. He is so bad on offense.
I remain firm that it's I always get so funny. I had to check that. I always get amused about the good at defense argument when it's going. I'm sorry if a player just chucks up a bunch of shots and eats all of the defense they could potentially be gaining you. It's hard to call them good. I mean, like technically,
they could have beaten the Warriors, Dre. Last year they could have beaten the Warriors. And I feel like Dylan Brooks almost single-handedly threw it away. Or even more so, the coach, Taylor Jenkins, put the ball in his hands. So it was the coach's fault.
And was it Dylan Brooks or Jaren Jackson that got fouled out for a game because of the technical foul on Gary Payton?
Yeah, Brooks is the one who committed the foul.
Because that was almost the swing, right? It was Dylan Brooks injured Gary Payton. Dylan Brooks gets pulled, Gary Payton gets pulled. That ain't fair. That could have swung the tides, but then when Dylan Brooks came back, they put him back in the game. And we mentioned that series a lot where I was saying I was conflicted because as soon as that happened, I went, I can't root for Memphis at this point, and they might be the favorites going forward. Because a 56-win team, it's like you have a 60-win squad if you get rid of your bad players. It is so funny to look at top basketball teams and go, you are so bad at picking out the 8th, 9th, 10th player on your team by, value. It's ridiculous. All right, Brian, this one, there's no way this is happening, but I'll stay optimistic. So Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray are back. They both
Right.
shot really well. Uh, the Nuggets lost, but it didn't matter. Nikola Jokic didn't take a shot. I think he was just trying to let the new guys back into the swing of the game. Aaron Gordon actually looked okay. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope looked bad, which makes me sad because that was a bad. I can't remember the player that we gave up. Wasn't Torrey Craig the other backcourt player that I've liked before for the Nuggets? But KCP was a bad trade the Nuggets did, which made me really depressed at the time. Classic Nuggets, and as I kind of mentioned with other teams, the Denver Nuggets just have enough bad players on their team that I am somewhat nervous about. Monte Morris.
Yeah,
So the
Monte
Nuggets
Morris
gave,
is on the Pelicans now, right? He's gonna be the
yeah,
starting point guard. Or
and we wound up with KCP for all of that, and it just was not a good. It was not a good trade. Makes me sad. But if Michael Porter Jr., Jamal Murray, and Nikola Jokic are all healthy, that's pretty freaking good, and it could happen. I think the rest of the school, we still have Jeff Green, we have like Ish Smith, we have some bad players, so I'm not super optimistic. But you never know. Like Warriors last season, right? You have a couple really good, strong top players that can overcome some mediocre, bad players at the bottom of your roster.
yeah, it's so I'm not one of these people who says the bubble year means nothing and was total BS. I think it was real, and that Nuggets team was really good, but those players got hurt, right? So we're gonna see, like, was paying those players that money worth it or not? Are they healthy enough to be good players again? It's a big question.
You know, One other thing, this is just a classic point that I hate. DeAndre Jordan is on the Nuggets. Everybody bashed the signing at the time. Everybody was bashing him last year, but his permanent numbers are fine. And he put up a good regular season game. And I said, what I'm going to get used to is him getting a 10 to 15-minute game, getting, say, 4 points, 8 rebounds, people saying DeAndre Jordan is washed, and then watching Jeff Green get, say, 15 points per game on 54% shooting, and people saying, how does Jeff Green still have it? This is just, the problem is if you have a really good defensive player or player good at the hustle stats like DeAndre Jordan, when they get older, their minutes decline and their hustle stats just decline because typically hustle stats just match per minute. So when DeAndre Jordan was at his prime, he was probably averaging 20 rebounds per 48. And as he gets older, he has to play fewer minutes, and of course his rebounds per minute also decline as well, and he drops down. When players like Carmelo Anthony get older, their shooting stats degrade, but they are able to take more shots to compensate. And the really, really smart ones like Kobe Bryant back in the day are able to ensure they stay above 20 points per game and keep getting paid. So I think DeAndre Jordan is fine. I think DeAndre Jordan is fine off the bench. As long as they're not planning on him being a central figure, I am much happier with that arrangement. As I mentioned, these bench players picking up good D-League players, picking up good veterans that still have a little left in the tank. This is very Moneyball, the movie Moneyball. This is what they would do. I really like DeAndre Jordan. I think he is, signed for nothing. I'll look that up in a second. So I thought, one preseason game isn't enough to say anything, but last season he still looked fine per minute. So it's one of these. I don't kind of know what people are talking about. Yeah, DeAndre Jordan is on the same contract as Andre Iguodala, and he's 4 years younger than Andre Iguodala.
Yeah, it's one of those eye test things, right? It's so easy for him to just stand around and grab a bunch of rebounds, but then he can't quite get out onto the perimeter during a switch, and everyone says, "Oh, he's terrible." Like, yeah, the eye test doesn't tell you everything, and even an old, big guy can contribute and grab some rebounds.
Yep. All right. We're almost done. The last one, this is kind of scary, Brian. First preseason game, LeBron James went 0 for 7 from the field. Is this the season the wheels arguably fell off last season in that he missed a lot of time with injury, but is this the season we finally lose, LeBron James finally goes over the age curve?
Mm. I mean, he's so smart that he can probably change the way he plays and still be effective if some parts of his game start to go away. But yeah, I mean, he's gotta prove that he can still be healthy, and Anthony Davis, a much younger player, has to as well. Yeah, it's those two guys just haven't been around, so
Yeah,
we'll
we'll
see.
have to see. And Anthony, it's the same point I was making about all those other players that have missed timed injury. Anthony Davis is coming back from like his third or fourth major injury. He was really healthy in his prime. He looked fine right before he signed the contract extension with the Lakers. But at this point, they really should shack him up, as in Shaq was a player that traditionally missed 15 to 20 games in a
Yeah.
season. That's why he only has one MVP. But if you read Phil Jackson's
He should
books
have
from
had
that
more.
time,
He should have had more.
well, I mean, I understand the wanting a player to play 3,000 minutes to win regular season MVP, and the award in general is very nebulous. So, I mean, but
Yeah.
I also agree he was one of the most dominant players ever. We're bringing this up too. Hank Aaron only had one MVP in his baseball career. So it's kind of, Shaq and Hank Aaron, you're kind of like, really only one? I think Babe Ruth's the same way,
Can I
actually. So
make a
they're,
different baseball comparison, Dre? Shaq and Barry Bonds were in their heyday at the same time, kind of in the mid to late 90s. And those are both players who they were going to change the rules of the game because they were so dominant. The hack of Shaq might have changed the free throw rules, and Barry Bonds with the intentional walks. So, it's Shaq is definitely one of the most dominant players of all time.
Agreed. All right, we are out of. I was going to say I'll give you a shot if you have any other small sample size theaters to add. Otherwise, we'll get to the official topics.
Oh no, let's get going. Just the preseason's a lot shorter than it used to be, so the regular season is coming up very soon.
And good news, I have been working on making sure the numbers should be good. So we might have a day or two where we're just getting them in place, but numbers will be there at the start of the season. So I'm happy. I am looking at looking at salary. Okay, this is not great. So let's talk our first topic, which is Tyler Herro. So Tyler Herro is signed to a 4-year, $120 million deal. Now, the slight good news. Under the new CBA with the new boost, that's not as bad as it sounds. But it's still bad. As an example, that will make him the second highest paid Heat player when his contract comes due. The good news is he's still cheap for another season. So this is the one hope. This is like the Bryant point. If the Heat are planning on trading him and just want him on a deal that they're able to trade the cap space and his value, that's fine. But that never happens. Teams make bad signings and they keep the bad players. Tyler Herro, the other good piece of news is he's young. So he's a young player that could improve, and the contract's not as bad as it could be. But you'll notice this is very couching. This is very like your friend gets hit in the face, and you're like, oh, the bruise isn't that bad. You're still not in good shape. You pointed out there's just a very simple thing that happened, which is the team is overvaluing specifically three-point shooting, because here's what's ridiculous. Tyler Herro, if I recall last season, put up 17 points per game, which is fine, but why are you paying max contract to that? There's obviously the hope of improvement, but even then, at this moment in time, Tyler Herro is a below average shooting guard, the weakest position in the NBA traditionally, and still to a point, I would argue, still there. And if you look at his shooting, he almost hit 40% three-point shooting last season, just below with rounding. So 39.9% from three, which is good. But if we look at the more important stat, this is what is kind of amusing and does turn us into the analytics nerds. His true shooting percentage. So the stat we are a fan of is true shooting percentage, which looks at a player's free throws, field goal attempts versus total points. Because what you really want to get a gauge for is if you kind of count a shot as an attempt, a free throw as a partial attempt, you can get super exact with this, and I believe there are advanced sites that do this. Namely, you really want to take total points divided by possession ending shots. And so to explain what that means, in the modern NBA on an and one, a player takes a shot. It is only counted as a shot if the ball goes in. So if you are fouled on the shot, either one of two things happens. Either A, you miss and you go to the line. That shot is not counted as a shot. And only, depending on if you get a 2-point foul or a 3-point foul, only the final free throw officially ends the possession. So really, what you would want to do is if a player goes to the line from a 3-point foul, you would take the total number of points that they made for that foul, so they could make 1 to 3 points, and divide it by 1, because the only one of those shots ends up possession, and that tells you how good they're doing. In the modern NBA, you really want that ratio to be about 55% to be average, meaning you would want a player to make about 1.1 points per possession ending shot. Tyler Herro using a rudimentary version of this, which is true shooting percentage, which estimates free throws, but it's good enough for government work, 56.1%. And this is actually problematic because if you look at the NBA as a whole, league average, I believe, is around 55.6%. And it actually might even be lower. Let me get the stat up. So if you go to Basketball Reference, there's a miscellaneous advanced stats tab on the bottom, which has true shooting. Last year, the average NBA team, it went up, Brian, this is cool, 56.6% true shooting. Tyler Herro's shooting is hurting his team, which is very counterintuitive, because if you are shooting below league average, that means your shooting as its own is not helping your team. You have to, it's very much grading on the curve. The NBA is a zero-sum league. For you to be productive, you have to be better than your opponents at what you are doing. If you score 2 points a possession and the league average is 2 points a possession, you need to be scoring 2.5 points a possession. As an example, the Nuggets, 59% true shooting, top in the league. The team that is closest to Tyler Herro, Sacramento Kings, who did not even make the playoffs and only won 30 games last season. Tyler Herro's shooting as a whole is not great. Now, his three-point shooting is really good. And you could make the argument that maybe if the team makes him take more threes, he would be a better player. And with the age, that's fine. But where we normally fall into a problem with that analysis is going, if Tyler Herro is below average last season and you are paying him to be good, and the hope is that he is going to get much, much better, that is just a flaw. So Tyler Herro is on a bad contract for the Heat.
Yeah, well said. And I think just in the league in general, there is a lack of creativity in assigning credit to players for winning, right? I think what happened, okay, so I haven't read all the, behind the scenes TikToks about how this signing went down yet. But what I'm guessing happened is, Jimmy Butler likes Tyler Herro and wants him on the team. Kyle Lowry probably likes Tyler Herro and wants him on the team. Bam Adebayo probably likes him and wants him on the team. So therefore, he's part of our core, and we're going to pay him, and that's it. End of conversation, right? Instead of saying, well, even though our guys like him, maybe he's not, as responsible for winning as those other players.
And I'm going to apologize right now for making a very noob mistake. I'm going to call this who's the guy? Andrew Bailey mistake, because all he knows how to do is read Basketball Reference. I am just taking names in the analytics community today, Brian. None of them listen, though. I have like 100 listeners, and none of them will be those people. Tyler Herro's career average is 17 points per game. Last season, he crossed the threshold, 20.7 points per game. One of our favorite movies is Bull Durham, which has some of the best baseball knowledge ever. It's a 1980s movie with Kevin Costner about a minor league baseball player.
It's sort of not a sports movie, though, which is interesting.
It is one of the. I disagree. It is one of the best analytics movies.
Oh, yes, I agree with you there.
Bull Durham and Major League being like the two best analytics movies is wild to me. But so in Bull Durham, he makes a comment to an up and coming pitcher to win 20 games in Major League Baseball. And once you've won 20 games in a season, he's like, you can do whatever you want. And this is very true in that pitchers winning a lot of it's out of their control. 20 wins in a season is kind of a meaningless stat, but it is true that was in the old days, the echelon pitchers had to cross to be considered great. 20 points per game is the echelon in the NBA to cross. Right. And once you cross that, you're considered gold. We've noticed this about players like Kristaps Porzingis, other not great players that get the big payday. So Tyler Herro, the reason he got the payday, he crossed 20 points per game last season, and he did it on below average shooting. And this is one of their takes we have. I'm glad we still have a few contrary ones, but the ones we'll always get hit on are draft picks are overrated. That's mine. And this one where, a 20-point per game score can be hurting his team on scoring. That is super duper counterintuitive. If Tyler Herro did a lot of other stuff, well, he's okay at rebounding, okay at assists, not great at any of the other hustle stats, steals. He might be productive, but he is a slightly below average player but he is getting paid for scoring, and I refuse to believe otherwise. So it's that 20 points per game. Now, what the Heat could do, which we know they won't, is they could flip Tyler Herro for better value. But we know that won't happen.
Yeah, and I think the shadow over all these deals is that teams are seeing, a TV contract coming up and their salary cap getting bigger in the next few years.
I didn't put this on the script, but there's the annual GM survey, which used to have the racist question of what is the player that does the most with the least athletic ability, and it was always the tall, lanky white guy that got it, not like the super short player. It was like really weird to see a 6'10" person say did the most with no athletic ability, and you're like, what are you talking about? And there were stats to prove them wrong, as in players like Kevin Love have better combine data than lots of players in the NBA. There's just one very obvious flaw about them, which is their color of their skin. So it was the racist question. But there's the annual GM survey, which asks lots and lots of questions. And that's the irony, is that you watch how GMs say things and you go, you guys still don't know. You still don't understand. Yay points isn't what wins games, and that is what it is. By the way, as a mean comparison, Brian, for the contract Tyler Herro is commanding, the production you would really want him to put up would be on par with last year's Joel Embiid and Steph Curry. Yeah. And interestingly enough, both of those players last year, I would say, had star ceilings, but actually missed a lot of time due to injury. So they're kind of an interesting, it's like, do you really think Tyler Herro is going to be able to put up 75% of a Joel Embiid or Steph Curry?
Yeah, my last thing on this is that we think shooting guard is probably the least valuable position in the league. But that's not true in conventional wisdom. People think shooting guards are very important.
I would say what's ironic is I would say shooting guard is the most misused position in the league. And until teams fix that, that's the problem, is it's going, you are hiring people for it to do a job that does not help winning and paying them a lot for it. And that is a mistake. And there are players like Manu Ginobili and, Jimmy Butler even, and James Harden and others.
Andre Iguodala.
Andre Iguodala. And he was actually, in his heyday was actually getting paid. So it's like there are players that can play the shooting guard position correctly and be valuable. The problem is traditionally, so by the way, the ones last year would be Tyrese Halliburton, James Harden, Luka Doncic. That's an interesting one. And that's kind of it. That's what's funny, to your point, is you normally don't want to play for a shooting guard because most of them are paid to just chuck up a lot of shots and aren't worth it. So yeah, it's don't pay money for shooting guards. They're what the running backs of the NBA when we're talking Final Fantasy fantasy football logic. So that is what it is.
Yeah, and unfortunately the dialogue is now centers are the running backs of the NBA, and we're gonna have to push back on that one over the next few years.
Interesting stat I just looked up. The Minnesota Timberwolves have two of the top 4 paid centers in the league, and I am here for it. I love it. Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns are number 1 and number 4 on the top 4 centers pay list, which is amazing.
Yep.
Nikola Jokic is number 5. So the best player in the NBA isn't even top 3 at his position in pay, which is a funny thing. Okay, this one is just hurts and is sad, but we kind of knew. Lonzo Ball, I think the word I heard, he was saying it was hurting him to just walk up the stairs. He has the same injury as Brandon Roy, is what you put on the script, which you said is a meniscus degeneration. For those that don't remember, Brandon Roy was a Rookie of the Year player, fantastic looking talent. It looked like him with Greg Oden was going to be it. It looked like the Portland Trailblazers were going to be everything. And then
Speaking
he was
of
just
good shooting guards, right, Trey?
He was amazing. Brandon Roy was great. And I was going to say, it's going to depress me because I've seen this happen a lot with getting older. I remember Brandon Roy recently, and if I go to Basketball Reference or Boxscore Geeks,
I think he's only 38 years old.
I really have to scroll to get to the seasons where Brandon Roy played, which is really painful. But yeah, Brandon Roy was just a great player and out injured. And Lonzo Ball might be in the same boat, which is really rough because, as I just mentioned, he looked really, really good on the Chicago Bulls, and I actually had some optimism for this season if he could come back, and he might be up there with kind of Derrick Rose-like scenario where it's like you've got this young, talented player, like if they come back healthy, and if he follows the Brandon Roy path, he's just going to be out of the NBA.
Yeah, I'm so worried. We don't know for sure. Medicine's a lot better than it was even in Brandon Roy's day, but yeah, I mean, apparently the way the meniscus surgeries go is they have an option to remove part of the meniscus to help it heal. But then once you start doing that surgery, I think he's done it twice now, and you remove like 2 pieces of it. It's just, he's going in that Brandon Roy path. So, Lonzo Ball's just a player we've always liked. He's really good at UCLA, really good early career, and weirdly bounced around to different teams despite being a really good player on both offense and defense. So I'm really hoping this isn't true and that he can find a way to get past this injury and play again for the Bulls.
Well, and I'm also getting more rough though as I get older. And when you look at players like this and go, if your permanent health is at risk, we didn't put a Tua or however you. I'm messing up pronunciation. The football player that got the concussion.
Yeah, it's Tua
Tua.
Tagovailoa.
It gets really rough when you start grading. Is this person going to be able to walk in 10 years versus should they play another season? And there's so much money. That the hard part now is we are getting so up there in the money that we just noted, right? Andre Iguodala and DeAndre Jordan are bench players that we are justifying as coaches, and they're making $3 million a season. So it's really, really hard to tell a player that might have one more contract in them to hang it up. And that might not even be the right move, but it's his long-term health, and it just really sucks. And as you mentioned, we are a huge fan, and he was on pace to put the Bulls in a fantastic position last season. So he's going to go up there on the board of, what if healthy players.
Yeah, I hope it works out. I really do.
I don't have much to say about this, but Kareem Abdul-Jabbar did like the classic Kareem thing, which is, I'm kind of like, I'm always 50-50 on it, but Kareem Abdul-Jabbar got really upset about Kyrie. Actually, it sounds like he's doing it for the right reason. I thought he was, when he tweeted about Kyrie, it was Kyrie flipping off the fans, and Kareem was saying, hey, you need to be a role model. But it looks like what he is saying, man, this makes me mad. I'm mad at myself, Brian. I should have read the article first. Kareem is mad at Kyrie for being a bad role model with all the stuff he's saying about COVID, about spreading conspiracy theories like Alex Jones. So I'm actually on Kareem's side here about saying Kyrie is really just not, he called him a comical buffoon, which unfortunately I think is the wrong take. I think Kyrie is very dangerous. I think Kyrie is very indicative of the classic misinformation spreading. And when you underestimate that is where you get into trouble. So I think even Kareem's take there is incorrect. It is really rough to like Kyrie because of stuff like this, because of the, I did make a flippant tweet about him where he came out in an interview and said he probably cost himself 4 years and 100 million over his vaccine stance. And I said, a really common thing on Twitter is these really stupid polls like, would you watch a movie you really hated for 24 hours for $10 million? And you go, who would ever say no to that? And you see athletes that have legitimately, athletes like Kyrie Irving and Djokovic, the tennis player, leave millions of dollars on the table, leave careers, leave career accolades on the table for the stance, and it's ridiculous, and it's super dangerous for that exact reason. So I kind of I still get a tinge at time to time from players like Kareem when they say the young players. Because I remember Kareem was going after the Ball brothers at UCLA and saying, besmirching a legacy, and going, what are you talking about? He's got a point. I don't necessarily like it. But yeah, I'm not a fan of Kyrie at this point.
Yeah, and I like your point about Kyreem. I'm mixing their names together.
Kyreem, that's a fun combo. Yeah.
I like your point about Kareem being a little bit high and mighty here because, it's worth pointing out that he does wear this religious leader hat, right? So he's almost, kind of saying in a way, God is watching you when you're misbehaving. So, yeah, that's a very fair point. But at the same time, he's making a distinction where Kyrie has kind of crossed the Rubicon here of, vaccine disinformation is bad, but it's confusing. He's a flat earth guy. But then when you start retweeting Alex Jones, who's an insurrectionist, that crosses a line for Kareem, and that's why I think he made a good point here.
Yep, you do always get in those interesting philosophical arguments with people where you can agree and disagree, and Kareem's always all over the place. I've loved stuff Kareem said, I've hated stuff Kareem said. This is like flat
and Kareem's the Kareem character in the Lakers show was so funny, right? Because he's this over-the-top, high and mighty character, played by Solomon Hughes, who's a professional basketball player himself. Very funny portrayal of Kareem, in my opinion.
Yep. All right. Let's. We talked this little pre-show. I'll give my 2 cents on it just so it's on the air. Aaron Judge just broke Roger Maris's American League record for home runs, which is remarkable to me. I didn't realize that all of the major home run records during the steroids era were in the National League, which seems kind of counterintuitive when you talk about a league with a designated hitter. You would figure the league with the designated hitter spot, you have to pitch to more people, et cetera. But nope, it was all National League because it was really three players: McGwire, Sosa, Barry Bonds. This entire thing has, of course, brought up the fun. Do we count the steroids era in baseball? Easy answer is, of course, yes, for two simple reasons. Because it's very America, where America wants to whitewash its past. The baseball was segregated for most of its time, including when Babe Ruth was hitting a bunch of home runs. So I made the point that when Babe Ruth crossed the 60 home run record, steroids weren't illegal. But you know what was illegal? Players like Sammy Sosa and Barry Bonds. So if you are going to ignore the fact that baseball was literally keeping out some of the best players, this makes me feel terrible. I'm forgetting the player's name, but one of the top home run hitters of all time played in the Negro Leagues and just never made it in.
Oh,
but
Josh Gibson, I think you're talking about.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But like, just an amazingly good home run hitter. Of course, yep. Jackie Robinson being able to come in. Satchel Paige won Rookie of the Year despite being, I think, in his 30s or 40s. There was a competing league with really, really good players that were not allowed to play for a lot of baseball's history. So you really can't, it's very much the ABA NBA schism of the 70s. You can't in good faith tell me that you think it's the same when they were actively keeping out good players.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a weird lens because it's like Roger Maris Jr. advocating for his dad and all the Yankees fans. So like, again, as a West Coast person, I'm like, this is a Yankees thing. This is so dumb. Yeah. And of course it's racist as well. So, yeah,
and then also
absurd.
Revisionists. Adam Todd Brown is the one I know who brought this up about greenies. Yes. And Tyler Conway made this point too, Roger Maris Jr.
Ball 4, Jim Bouton is the greenies coming out. Yeah.
There's a great book on that.
Yep.
But yeah, amphetamines basically. So
yes.
meth was basically legal in Major League Baseball.
They handed out like candy in the dugout.
Yeah, that's the metaphor used, and it's true. There were candy dishes in the middle of dugouts with greenies, is what they were called, which were essentially meth tablets that players could take to keep themselves awake. And then what's even more is, after greenies were outlawed in baseball, a year later, the ADHD population in baseball spiked because people were getting legalized prescriptions. So it is very disingenuous to think in baseball that players are not taking performance-enhancing drugs and haven't always been taking performance-enhancing drugs. It's just a matter of which ones we choose to like or not. Pre-show, you also made the note, yeah, sure, Barry Bonds, Sammy Sosa, Mark McGwire were taking PEDs, but so were the pitchers. One of the most infamous ones, Roger Clemens, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Who is not in the Hall for the same reason. So it's like, if everybody was taking PEDs, including the pitchers, and in fact, I seem to recall that was one thing after the steroids era went down and we noticed other things coming back, it was basically pitchers coming down to earth as well. So it's just very sanctimonious of baseball to act as if there was any point in baseball history that has been pure, especially given, right, like the Cleveland Indians. I mean, they changed their name to Cleveland with the C, but I'm sure people still wear the stuff at the stands. It's like baseball has so many years of racism, drug use, cheating, the Houston Astros scandal recently, that it is so perfectly American to act as if this is some perfect, pure sport. Never been. Sorry. Baseball has never been pure, never been untainted from drugs, racism, etc. Sorry. Easter Bunny isn't real either.
Yeah, and we always talk about the Hall of Fame, right? Like Pete Rose got left out of the Hall of Fame because he bet on baseball when he was a manager, although he bet on his own team. And then you have players like Ty Cobb, who maybe is a murderer. It's not really clear. So, yeah, it's just there's not really a clear standard there. And then the Barry Bonds story is kind of funny, too, because let's remember what the trajectory of Barry Bonds' career was. He was already maybe the best player in the National League or in all of baseball kind of in the early to mid 90s before he took steroids. He was that guy that in the book Moneyball, they would say is the 5-tool player, right? He did everything. Played defense, ran, hit for power, hit for average, did everything.
Is there official accounts of when he started? Like, do we know definitively when he started taking it?
Well, so this is how the story was reported at the time. was that he was not taking steroids when McGuire and Sosa had their chase, and he got jealous of them. He said, these two guys that are taking steroids have taken over my position as the best player with this home run chase. I'm going to start taking steroids to retaliate. And his body changed a lot. Famously, his head size got bigger.
Yep.
And like, he was just upset that the league turned a blind eye to Sosa McGuire steroids and started doing it himself. So that doesn't justify it. He's famously kind of one of the, worst people in terms of Bay Area athletes. Like, he was very bad to everyone that he came across. But at the same time, he was in a system, and it's weird how that baseball story went down.
Yeah. And I mean, he had 3 MVPs then before taking steroids at all. And I mean, again, that is my in general problem with a lot of the whataboutisms. It's going, if you are going to put that as the standard for bad, you have to realize how much stuff that means you are obviously taking a blind eye to. In terms of cheating, blind eyes, and weird double standards, let's get to our last story, Brian. We're going to keep going with chess. There was a True Hoop story about basketball and Bobby Fischer. It's interesting. Found it fluffy, but I like it. Anyway, but we're not talking that. We are talking Hans Niemann and the ball that dropped today. So here's what's kind of remarkable. Quick recap of the thing. Hans Niemann is a top American chess player, not like real top. The best of the best are players like Hikaru Nakamura, Wesley So. Hans Niemann is probably a tier below that, but he's top 50 in the world, which is very, very good. Kind of. We don't know how officially he's top 50. He was playing in a major over the board. So chess has 2 components, either over the board, 2 people sit next to each other across a chessboard and play, which is what we're used to and spend lots of time thinking. Conversely, with online chess, which really took off during the pandemic because chess players were not allowed to play over the board with each other. And online chess is quickly eclipsing over the board chess in relevance, in my opinion, Brian, which is why this kind of matters. Hans Niemann, as a young player, cheated in online chess. And this might seem like, oh, big deal, but chess.com has slowly started adding pay tournaments. So there were pay tournaments, as in tournaments you could make money in, called Titled Tuesdays. This is where top chess players play each other, that Hans Niemann cheated in, that chess.com is able to detect. And so chess.com is able to do a lot of things. This was really fascinating when I was hearing a talk about it from Danny Wrench, one of the higher ups, I think CTO of the company. But what he brought up was actually the Houston Astros cheating scandal with the stealing signals. And he said, for cheating, when you are looking at a player making odd moves, and so baseball is perfect because you have players hitting strikes, knowing a strike is coming more frequently than you expect. But he said a flip side people don't really consider is these players that maybe would have chased strikes before stop chasing. So you can tell when a baseball player is cheating by getting signals fed to them, because now they are waiting to be told when to swing as opposed to taking intuition. So not only are they getting more hits than they used to, they are swinging at fewer bad or not even bad, but questionable pitches, because that's what pitchers do, right? A player like Clayton Kershaw, one of my favorites, he has a slider that his slider and curveball look so similar that there could be a strike coming over the corner or a ball that is nowhere near the strike zone, and they look very similar to batters. So if suddenly no one is swinging at Kershaw's curveballs, and suddenly everybody is swinging at, and the same players are all swinging at Kershaw's fastballs, that's those two things together are the tell. It's not just, hey, this guy's hitting Clayton Kershaw's fastballs at a better rate than he used to. It's going, hey, this guy stopped swinging at the curveball, which they used to swing at all the time. So chess.com has algorithms like this to check cheating, as well as other things that, you're playing on a web browser where they can detect if you toggle on or off the screen. They can check your mouse movements, etc. So they can determine if a player is playing sketchy. And Hans Niemann was detected cheating in multiple events, and they even confronted him about it with back-to-back communication where he admitted to cheating. Essentially, he was banned from the site and basically had to agree that he cheated and agree that he would not cheat anymore if he wanted back on the site. However, this all gets weird when in an over-the-board tournament, Magnus Carlsen is suspicious that Hans Niemann cheated. That would have been maybe the end of it, except here's where Hans Niemann did a very classic grifter maneuver. He went on an interview and he basically attacked Magnus Carlsen for impugning his honor. He attacked Hikaru Nakamura because Hikaru Nakamura is a top chess streamer and was watching the event and basically was saying, He was pretty sure that Magnus thought Hans cheated. He knew that Hans was a cheater and was saying, hey, I'm not going to say anything, but I know for a fact Hans has done a lot of cheating. So what was funny is in response to that, Hans went after Magnus and Hikaru and saying, how dare you accuse me of cheating? I've only cheated 2 times, yada, yada, yada. And where this gets into problems, that's lying on camera, because chess.com went, the big bombshell that dropped today. So this is the follow-up. We've talked about, if you want to go, here's what I recommend all of our listeners, Brian, go back and listen to the last 30 minutes of the last 2 shows we've done. We've been going every 2 weeks, Brian, go us. We've talked about this in depth, and you can look it up more. But the big bombshell that dropped today is chess.com released a report on Hans Niemann saying he has cheated. He came back and said he wasn't going to cheat anymore, but him lying about it in public at the Singfield Cup and the depth of his cheating has basically made us go, we can't trust this guy anymore. And so that was the ironic part, and something that amuses me in the Trump era that people fall for is someone getting on camera and sounding very confident. And I'm well aware, Brian, I'm throwing a boulder in a glass house at myself. Someone getting on camera and sounding very confident does not mean they're telling the truth. People are allowed to lie. And so this was what was really funny about this entire debacle is a bunch of people were going, how dare Magnus impugn Hans's honor? Hans is coming back and, saying he's willing to take a polygraph test or whatever. And chess.com came out and said, like, we have you on camera talking to us saying, you cheated and then lying about it at the Singfield Cup. How did you think this was going to go?
Yeah, their data said that they thought he could have cheated in up to 100 tournament games, I think is the number I saw, right? So it was a lot of games.
It was something like 100 games. And 25 were when he was basically a professional streamer. Now, where it gets annoying, and this is funny, is Hans Niemann is about 19. So a lot of this did happen when he was a minor. But as we noted on last week's show, as with many professional sports, especially primarily white athlete sports, you can make money in your teens. If you look at tennis, if you look at golf, if you look at chess, you can make money, even baseball, right? Minor league teams, you can make money as a teenager. So Hans Niemann, as a professional and as a streamer, was cheating playing this, and no, like that's the biggest bombshell in this report that chess.com released to me isn't just their data about how they knew he was cheating in games, et cetera. It's that they have back and forth. Like they basically have Slack dialogues, email chains with Hans Niemann where Hans says, yes, I cheated. What can I do to get reinstated, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's funny. Well, no, let's keep going.
I mean that's really and the bigger, like I said, the biggest thing to me that just got odd was the number of people that backed Hans quickly and were saying, how could Magnus do this, yada yada yada. And I kind of noted a couple of things. I said it was good for the sport, which is kind of funny because this is still a big news story. And I hate to tell you, the Trump, I keep saying the Trump era, but it's true, right?
Yes.
All press is good. I'm sorry, because there is some segment of the population, no matter how negative the press is, it's called the Barbra Streisand effect is the most popular version of it. So Barbra Streisand was really upset at this report for showing a picture of her house. And this report was, I think would have been seen by a couple, thousands of people, and they probably would have glossed over it. But she said, get rid of that picture of my house. And suddenly everybody said, oh my goodness, there's her house. And the traffic spiked. And now suddenly the demand for Barbra Streisand's house went up. And the same thing happens with chess, where a lot of people going, yes, you'll have like, oh my goodness, there's cheating in chess. But you also have people going, oh, I wasn't aware that there were major online chess tournaments taking place, which there are, and they're getting huge. There is a global chess championship going on right now, I believe, for I want to say the first prize is like 200,000. Which is, that's, as I said, online chess is quickly eclipsing over the board chess in terms of relevance. And that's kind of what happened here is my 2 cents. This reminds me very much of Vegas, because I think when chess.com was small and startup-y, they just needed top players on the site. So they were willing to forgive cheaters with kind of the auspice of, oh yeah, sure, grandmasters, we're online, we're not real. Even FIDE, the biggest chess organization, the international chess organization, has not taken online chess that seriously. But thanks to the coronavirus pandemic, the Queen's Gambit, the popularity has boomed. The money in online chess is now bigger than the money in over the board chess. And so, and chess.com is a company that wants to IPO. and they have Magnus Carlsen. They're acquiring Magnus Carlsen, the number one player in the world's company, for around $80 million. They have Hikaru Nakamura, the number one blitz player in the world, on board. And so when you have Hans Niemann, a cheater, a young cheater that is very sketch, because I mean, that's the other thing this report brought up is he has had one of the most rapid ascensions from age 11 to 19 of any player ever. This is over Bobby Fischer, who is well known as like one of the top junior players of all time. Bobby Fischer, at the time when he was a young player, had the record for youngest grandmaster. At the time of his retirement, had the biggest gap between, I think, him and second place in the world, which I think still hasn't been matched. I mean, even like Magnus Carlsen has had players that are 50, 60 points from. I think Bobby Fischer was over 100 points using the ELO rating system, which we've talked a lot about, which is how chess players are graded. So they're going, Hans Niemann is hyper sketch. At best, you have to be really confused and ask yourself, this player looked like he was going to level off at 2,800 and then shots to 2,700, which is very atypical. And we have the top players in the game on a site that's going to IPO. We have to get rid of it. And like I said, this reminds me very much of Vegas back in the day, where there was a lot of mob interference in Vegas. And then when Vegas kind of went corporate, that's when you get rid of all of the unsavory elements.
Yeah, that's why you can't ignore Hans, right? Is because either he's this, big fat cheater that they need to throw out, or he's the best player in the world. Like, when you look at the data, there's not really another choice there, right? So unfortunately, it looks like he is the cheater right now. I was rooting for him to be this breakthrough player, but it seems like it wasn't meant to be.
It was too weird from the get-go, because as I mentioned, like Hikaru Nakamura knew, and I think a lot of what happened is Chess.com has cheating detections and cheating lists. They're known players that have gotten banned. I don't know if Hikaru Nakamura has seen it, but Hikaru is one of the biggest names on the site and plays all of the events. Something that happens on Chess.com, and I've seen this, is if you play a cheater, you will occasionally get an email that will say, as an FYI, a player that you played against violated the fair play policy. We can't tell you who they are, but here's the rating points back from that you played against them. Now, here's the problem with that saying we can't tell you who they are. I can go back through my game logs and look at every player I've played. And if suddenly if it's like Dre played Brian Foster was active 2 hours ago. Dre played Hikaru Nakamura. I am 0-1 against Hikaru. I had a drawing opportunity in the end game and I blew it in the simul, Brian. So close. Yeah, but Dre played Hikaru Nakamura. Hikaru Nakamura is playing right now. Dre played this person. This person is no longer on the site. It's not hard to tell who cheated against me. So Hikaru can know the same thing, right? If there are top level players that were banned for cheating and Hikaru plays every single event and then suddenly goes, hey, what happened to this top level player that he probably knows from in person as well? It's very obvious. So enough people knew that stuff was sketch about Hans in the beginning that it was very, very odd to me to see how quickly people were flocking to defend. And I kind of argue this is traditional sports. People like the narrative. The narrative of if you say to yourself, Hans Niemann is an underdog that beat Magnus, that is a great story. If you say to yourself, Hans Niemann is showing how easy it is to cheat at a top level event, because that's the other problem. Everybody is rightfully saying we cannot prove that Hans Niemann cheated. And that is the problem. Yes. You can't. No one likes that. Everybody wants definitive answers. Chess.com's 72-page report that just dropped says definitively Hans Niemann cheated to such a point that our algorithms detected him. And when we talked to him about it, he admitted it. That's the story there. But over the board, I mentioned that Houston Astros thing. All that has to happen is Hans Niemann plays a little safer in certain situations and a little better in others, and that's almost undetectable. You could make the argument like the Adelaide 36ers, right? A 2,700 beating Magnus Carlsen is atypical. You don't expect it. But I have beaten players with that gap before. I am between 15 and 1,700 blitz on chess.com. I've beaten 2000s. I've beaten national masters before in the right circumstance. So it's not impossible. But, Magnus was suspicious. And then when following up and going, oh, this guy is like a professed cheater, he shouldn't belong in any tournament. That's not even a bad take to have, unfortunately, right? It's not a bad take to have. If online chess is the future of our sport and we have someone that has cheated, as an example, Hans Niemann has cheated against Dan Naroditsky. Dan Naroditsky is like number 2 behind Hikaru Nakamura in terms of speed chess playing on chess.com, or at least he was before Magnus joined. Now that Magnus joined, sorry, Naroditsky, you're number 3, but still top 3. top three. If you've cheated against one of the most renowned players on a site, I'm sorry, there's just not a spot for you. And not only, and then like I said, his interview where he came out and said his name was being impugned and lied, that was the most bizarre thing of all. But it is a lesson to everybody. People are able to lie. It is easy to do. So just because someone sounds confident, don't just be excited. You can wait for the data. And I said that at the time, and the data's come out, and you were back in Hans, doesn't look good.
Yeah, great points. And I did go and watch Hikaru's stream today, right after the Wall Street Journal article dropped, but before the full report from chess.com dropped. And Hikaru's conclusion was basically, this whole thing just makes me really sad that we're entering a new era where we just don't know who's cheating, and it seems like it's very easy to do. And it's gonna hurt the game. So
Nah,
you don't think so? You think you can just push
brought
through
this
it?
up. I brought this up before. I brought up the NBA had refs fixing games.
Yeah.
NFL had Deflategate. Baseball had the Houston Astros. They still got to keep their titles. College sports were rigged back in the day. There is a point where it might not, but I mean, what I've argued, this is fantastic in so many ways for chess. If chess goes for shorter time controls, better control on gaming rigs that people are doing, more prize. I mean, time delay. That's one addition that has to happen that did not, which Hans Niemann has kind of pushed. Hans Niemann has helped advance the sport, ironically, which is to say, if you have players playing a game of chess that takes more than, I would say, 10 minutes, you cannot be live streaming the games. I think the ideal chess game for top players is about 30 minutes a player. So all you have to do is do a 15-minute time delay against top players, and we're in great shape. The sport there is a tournament with a $200,000 first prize going on right now online. That concept, if you had told someone that in the 90s, would have been laughable.
Yes. And I agree with you in the end. I think Hikaru is just worried from a player's perspective that he's going to be competing in all these tournaments and have all this doubt. But I think you're definitely right about this.
Well, I mean, you noted this too, where you said Hikaru is a top streamer. He knows what's going to get ears. I think that is an important thing to do. I'll end with this. So Hikaru Nakamura and Ben Feingold are two of the top streamers in terms of chess. Another one was Levi Rosman, Gotham Chess.
He was there in Hikaru's stream today chatting.
Nice. Yeah. And I sent you a clip from him where he was honest. He came up and said, everybody wants me to say this is terrible, the cheating scandal, but he said, but if you increase the traffic to a streamer fivefold, I can't lie and say that's bad. This is Levy saying that. And he's right. That's my 2 cents. So that is just a really, really good thing to have the increased traffic going on. And then, as you were noting, Hikaru as a streamer probably knows the sound bites to say. If Hikaru comes on and says, hey, the cheating's bad, but we're flushing out the cheating. Online chess is getting better and better. I'm a top player in it. This is nothing but good for me because I can, if he follows the Vishy Anand, another top chess player, if I follow the Vishy Anand path, I've got another, this has extended my lifespan 10 years. This is fantastic for me. Everybody watching the stream is like, this is boring. I'm going to turn the channel. But he's like, I watched the same stream you were, at least part of it. Where he's like, this is bad. This is bad. This is horrible. He's.
But he was doing numbers as he was saying that, right?
He's being a wrestling announcer. If Jim Ross goes, wrestling is fake. This is so stupid.
God.
Yeah. Oh my God. He's got to be saying that. That's what Hikaru's doing. And you said that. And when you said that to me in a back and forth where you said Hikaru knows what to say on the stream, I was like, oh, you're right. Yeah. He knows what to say. He knows what's so.
I've been watching his stream a little bit more. He's a really good streamer.
Yeah,
he knows what
he's doing. And I mentioned this with Ben Feingold. I think Ben Feingold recognizes the alliance with the Sinkfield Cup. Sinkfield is one of the. Ben Feingold has a chess club that he started in Atlanta. Now he has turned over the reins to it because COVID basically shut it down. And fortunately, being an online streamer paid better bills than running a chess club as a top chess pro. But he still is really in the chess club scene, and Sinkfield is the biggest chess club in St. Louis. So he knows it behooves him to stay on Rex Sinkfield's good side. So when Magnus Carlsen, the number one player, withdrew from Sinkfield's tournament, Magnus is in a good light right there, whereas Hans Niemann is the top chess story, and he's playing in that tournament. Ben Feingold has been very pro Hans Niemann, and to almost a confusing degree, and I can just go, there's a very obvious thing that makes sense, which is to say, if you want to keep good relationship ties in the chess club community, not pissing off Rex Singfield while also boosting your views isn't a bad way to go. So, I mean, that's all what's going on right here. I think that's an important thing to kind of end this with is when you're watching streamers, when you're watching reports, eyeballs is the name of the game. So ask yourself if the person giving you the information is gaining that in any way. So, but anyway, chess is in good shape. I'm happy. And I'm excited to see if Hikaru can win the chess.com Global Chess Challenge. I'm just sad that Magnus isn't in it.
Yeah.
All right, Brian, all of the topics, anything to end out on?
No. Thanks for doing a long show. That was fun. I'm ready for some NBA games. Let's do it.
I promise. I mean, once NBA gets going, the chess at the end, I think I'll either start turning it into real article content or supplementary podcast stuff. But I appreciate you letting me talk because it's fun.
I love it.
But NBA is almost here, Brian, and we both have very good cause to be optimistic. All right. If you found us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. We go live every other Tuesday around 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers. You can find recaps on the show, channeled Nerd Numbers on YouTube. I've been your host, Ray Alvarez, found most places as Nerd Numbers. Producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster, found on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. You can also find the show in audio form anywhere fine podcasts are found, iTunes, Stitcher, etc., as the Boxscore Geek Show. Have a week and hope small sample size theater treats you well. Shouldn't have ended with a tongue twister. There you go.